The meat industry is a $2 trillion industry globally, and
Wow.
it's 2.5% of global GDP. So it's a massive industry. 30 or 40% of Australians now have got a good sense that they're eating too much meat and it's not good for them. And so they actively want to reduce their meat consumption. We want people to keep eating meat, but we just want them to eat it made from, in our case, fungi and plants rather than animals. And so, yeah, between Chris and Jim, they know everything there is to know about growing mushrooms, the science behind them, and how to cook them.
I bet they're fun
and they
guys.
Actually,
Fun guy.
They are,
Fun
mush-
guy.
Oh, I got where you're going. Oh my God!
But I'm going
Kerwin.
to assume, being in the mycelium space, they're going to have a very alternative perspective on them anyway.
They certainly do. Yeah. And you should stick to business coaching and not comedy.
This episode is brought to you by Nail It and Scale It, the world's leading fast growth program for businesses. If you have ever wanted to grow your business faster than what you can right now, if you need to make more revenue, if you need more leads, if you need more clients, if you need to know how to plan your business in a strategic way in order to hit big goals, if you need to learn how to scale your business and grow your team and your business so that you have more freedom, then this program is for you. Imagine 3 days immersed with me where we cover all aspects of business, but we do it from an immersive but also an execution standpoint. We execute every step of the way, and we're looking at 5 key areas. We're looking at your psychology, we're looking at your marketing, your sales, your leadership, and we're looking at your planning and how we integrate these 5 key areas to grow your business and your brand quickly. So if you'd like to find out more information, kerwinray.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome to Unstoppable today, Michael Fox. Fox by name, Fox by nature. How are you, mate?
I'm good, thanks, Kerwin. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Mate,
really good to catch up.
It's great to have you on. And I mentioned just before we jumped on, while we're trying to work out my skin condition, that we actually spoke. I think it's about 10 years ago now, when you were you're knee deep in Shoes of Prey. And that's I was more than kind of excited. I was really excited to have this conversation, to really reflect on not just the last 10 years, but the rest of the journey and how it's culminated to where you are today. So, mate, just in a nutshell, I always ask my guests this question, and it's a bit of a curveball, but I say, if you're at a dinner party and nobody knows who you are, and there's 8 people sitting around the table, and it's the beginning of the night, and the attention turns to you, and someone asks you this question, so what do you do, Michael? How do you normally answer that question?
It's a good question. Well, it's changed it's changed a few times over the last few years, I guess. But right now, I'm passionate about helping to contribute to ending industrial animal agriculture, and I've got a business, Fable. We develop delicious, healthy meat alternatives to help people reduce their meat consumption. And
mate, you're a bit of a pedigree, a bit of a thoroughbred. You do have a bit of a history, because you started back. When did you start your first venture?
Yeah, it was back, actually we launched in 2008. We launched Shoes of Prey. We must have been talking, we caught up a couple of years into Shoes of Prey. Yeah, so it's been sort of a good 12, 13 years in the startup tech space. Yeah.
And here we are today. So, mate, where does your journey begin? Like, have you been an entrepreneur? Like, I know we've obviously spoken once before, but I want to go back a little bit further, perhaps, to where it all began. Where did your entrepreneurial kind of interest come from?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think I probably always had that sort of built into me. Like, my parents and my grandma kind of tell stories about me sort of doing lots of entrepreneurial things as a kid, and wanting to play shops with all my cousins and trying to round my grandma up to sell seeds and plants and different things to help me sort of set up a business, but actually trying to get her to do all the work and me sort of just manage and boss her around. So I think it probably was like,
so
it's probably built into me.
It started early. And did this come from the environment? Like, was mum or dad in business, grandma in business?
No, mum was an accountant, dad was a mining engineer. So no, it didn't. But yeah. I mean, I think maybe I've got a little bit of ADHD, and kind of don't sort of like going sort of necessarily always going sort of the traditional paths. Yeah, I think I've just always liked and enjoyed doing kind of fun and new and exciting things, which probably lends itself a bit more to entrepreneurship.
So I'm going to assume with that statement, school wasn't exactly your strong point?
Actually, I mean, I can force myself to do it, and I did okay in school, and I ended up studying law and got qualified as a solicitor. So, and I think like that wasn't like my natural inclination or instinct at all, and I didn't enjoy doing that sort of thing. But I think it was, in hindsight, it was actually good because it did teach me, like, I forced myself to learn, like, attention to detail and those kinds of things. But yeah, now I do my best to try and avoid it because it definitely isn't what comes naturally to me.
But having a law degree in business has got to be something that's pretty handy, I've got to assume.
Yeah, I mean, that is helpful. Yeah. And the kind of discipline around, studying and all that kind of stuff.
And how did you end up in law?
I think I finished high school and it was like, well, what do I do next? I enjoyed debating in high school. And so, I thought maybe law would be the kind of closest path to that. And then, finished my law degree, and I'd done at the University of Queensland, I did commerce and law, and I'd gone and done all the kind of internships that you do with a commerce law degree. I'd done one in an accounting firm, really didn't like that. Did one in an investment bank, really didn't like that. Actually, I hadn't done an internship at a law firm by the time I finished. And so it was like, well, that must be all that's left to do. So I'll go get a job at a law firm. And didn't suit me at all. I left within the year.
Yeah, right. That quickly.
Yeah.
And what came next?
Yeah, well, I kind of found myself I was working at one of the big national law firms, and bored. I'd get to the end of the day, I'd jump on the train to go home, and I'd open back then Business Review Weekly, the magazine, and I'd just be reading Business Review Weekly and reading about all these entrepreneurs. And the Atlassian guys were just getting started. They were starting to get a bit of coverage in that magazine. So reading about lots of different interesting businesses. And that's what I'd read on the train on my way home and when I'd get home. And then I'd come back into the law firm the next day, and I'd have completely forgotten about what I was working on the day before because my heart just wasn't in it. My head just wasn't in it. And so, I figured I like reading Business Review Weekly. Maybe I should go work for one of these companies that's getting written about. And I managed to get connected into Super Cheap Auto, the retailer.
Yeah, right.
They're headquartered in Brisbane, and they were doing a graduate program. So went and did a 2-year graduate program there, kind of working through all the departments in their business. And that was my kind of introduction, I guess, to the business world as opposed to law. And then, kind of fell in love with retail doing that too.
That's so interesting. So you spent 2 years working through every single department in the organisation of Supercheap.
Yeah, exactly.
And at the time, I was going to assume they were probably like $100 million plus organisation, yeah?
Yeah, I think they're turning over about 300 million at the time. They had sort of 200 odd stores. So it was a good sized business, big enough that there was lots of stuff, going on, lots to learn, but small enough that 2 years I could fully understand the business. I managed a store for 3 months over Christmas, worked in the warehouse for a couple of months, picking and packing and understanding how all that side of things worked in HR, finance, the buying team. So it was a good kind of training.
What an excellent opportunity. And Supercheap's a household name, obviously, here in Australia. What were some of the biggest takeaways that you learnt working for those guys?
Yeah, I kind of fell in love with retail. I love the whole sort of understanding the consumer and developing a range of products to present to that consumer in a physical retail store. What should the whole range and the full offer be to bring customers into store? Love the whole kind of marketing side of the business. The logistics and operations, sourcing different products from China and other places around the world, and how you ship that here efficiently and how you manage your stock. And I just really kind of enjoyed all those, learning about all those elements of a physical kind of business and physical products.
Did you end up with a fully sick WRX at the end of it, or?
I think when I started, I had a 1962 Chrysler Valiant, and then I ended up with a 1989 Porsche 944 Turbo.
Right.
Yeah, that was a really fun car. So I always enjoyed my cars. Yeah.
You got into it, and so after Supercheap, what came next?
Yeah, so I finished up at Supercheap, and kind of they were actually just working on a bicycle business, which they've since shut down, but I think it was called Gold Cross Cycles. So they were doing a startup basically within Supercheap Auto, and I wanted to get on that team. I wanted to work on a startup, doing something new, and they only had 2 people on it. They kind of couldn't justify, when I finished the grad program, they couldn't justify the expense of having a third person on it. So I ended up in this boring merchandising data analyst role, which wasn't me. It was back to more being a lawyer. So I'd been reading a lot about Google. Google were kind of just built. This was in 2007, 2008. So earlier than that, 2006. So Google would just they'd opened their office in Sydney maybe a year before. They were sort of at about 30 people. So I ended up applying there and getting an advertising sales role at Google. Ended up applying when they were about 30 people. By the time I joined, they were about 100 people. They were like ramping up really fast. So then I did advertising sales at Google for 2.5 years.
And I'm going to assume that was a pretty awesome experience to get exposed behind the scenes, behind the veil of Google.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, that was my introduction to kind of the tech space.
Right.
Got to spend time at their headquarters in California and spent 3 months at their European office in Dublin. Met lots of awesome people. Got kind of that whole sort of tech Silicon Valley culture. Got sort of indoctrinated by all of the excitement of that. And at that point in Australia, Google was basically a startup. So it was with 100 people, one year old business in Australia. It was super exciting time to be working there, and felt very startup-y. So I think that also gave me the bit more of a startup introduction too.
I think most people would probably kill to get the opportunity to work inside Google. Like, what were the biggest lessons that you took from that time with them?
Yeah, I think a lot of the cultural aspects of like how to motivate like really kind of talented, driven people. So having a lot more sort of free, it's certainly at a law firm, it's like very kind of, you wear your suit and tie and go and work in your office, literally shut the door in your office, like very kind of old school culture. Supercheap Auto was kind of a lot more progressive, but still it was a lot of, most of the workforce was kind of retail staff members, and sort of it had a very different cultural vibe. And then Google, obviously, at that time it was winning all the best place to work in the world awards. Just really fun, exciting culture and a strong sort of performance-driven culture. So I think I probably took a lot of that away.
What's the one thing you've seen in their culture that you think is applicable to any business, that is easy to apply and actually quite scalable?
I think fairly simple, like hire talented people, set kind of goals that they need to aim for, and then get out of their way, other than where they kind of need a bit of coaching and help.
Yeah, right.
But basically don't sit there and micromanage what they're doing. Hire talented people, set goals, and then let them go.
So I'm going to assume at this stage, is this where Shoes of Prey had started bubbling in the background?
Yeah, so I think I'd always had that sort of entrepreneurial bent. The financial crisis hit kind of end of 2008. Google kind of battened down the hatches. So a lot of the things that I loved about working there, like the ability to go work in different offices, they kind of cut off that stuff to keep costs down, which is understandable. They introduced all these new levels to get promoted, because they wanted to slow down the rate at people were getting promoted, to slow down sort of growth in wages. And so it kind of, some of that got a little bit over the top. I think my boss ended up being 6 rungs ahead of me on the ladder, and it was a minimum of 2 years to get a promotion. So it's going to take me 12 years to get to the level my boss was at. So I think they've fixed some of those things, but I just got the sense that, okay, Google's getting bigger, it's getting a bit bureaucratic, it's changing. This is the best place in the world to work, and I'm still not fully satisfied. So maybe I need to go and start something myself and try and build the culture and the kind of company that I want to build.
So did you go from Google to Shoes of Prey, or was there an intermission?
Yeah, no, kind of went straight to it. So I was kind of working weekends on Shoes of Prey, sort of had the idea and the concept of doing that. Spent probably 7 or 8 months kind of working on Shoes of Prey evenings and weekends, and then got that to the point where, okay, we feel comfortable, and if we want to have a shot at this, we've got to do it full time.
So for those people who don't know what Shoes of Prey was quite a successful startup where you actually had a online e-commerce store where women could go on there. My ex-wife, I should say, actually customized her wedding shoes on on Shoes of Prey, and they could customize their shoes to basically build them out however they want. And I remember at the time thinking, wow, this is absolutely fucking revolutionary. How did you guys come up with the idea, the concept, and what was the gradual evolution before you bit the bullet and then just jumped in?
Yeah, so we were kind of looking for, the 3 of us co-founded the business, and our skill sets, we kind of had a mix of retail, tech, and marketing and branding experience.
Yeah.
We could see, this was back 2008, online retail in Australia was in the really, really kind of infant stages, and we could see that was going to grow over the next sort of decade. So we figured, all right, let's go do online retail. We've got the skill sets to do that. Then we were looking for a product that was like unique and different and interesting. And then Jody, my ex-wife and one of our co-founders, whenever we'd do holidays to Europe, she'd book stopovers in Hong Kong. There were little stores in Hong Kong where you could design your own shoes. And she'd come back to Australia from holidays, and all her friends would see all these amazing shoes she'd designed and be like, "Oh, where'd you get those shoes?" And she was like, "I designed them myself." And so we could see that there was interest in that from consumers. And so we figured, oh, why don't we try and scale that, rather than just doing it in a little retail store in Hong Kong, let's turn that into a kind of online business where people can do that online.
And you guys had a pretty good run with that, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, it was this full startup roller coaster. Like we started out first 2.5 years, we just grew the business organically out of its own cash flow. We kind of got to $2 or $3 million a year revenue run rate doing that. And then we had all these consumers coming to our website, like tens of thousands of women a day coming to our website, but really, really low conversion rates. And so, we did a lot of focus groups and interviews and talked to these customers coming to the website. And what they told us was, and what we realized was that these were mass market customers. We'd been doing really well in this niche of women who are creative and passionate about designing, and then some sub niches like wedding shoes, like you experienced. But we weren't nailing the mass market. But then, we had all these mass market consumers coming to the website. So we interviewed them, and what they told us was, yes, we love the idea of designing our own shoes, but we need you to do 3 things before we'll purchase. So one, we want a faster lead time. We were taking about 5 weeks to deliver shoes, which, when it's your wedding, you're planning more than that in advance. But when it's you're a mass market customer, you're ordering for an event. So people said they wanted sub 2-week delivery times. They didn't want to pay the 30% premium that we were charging, and they wanted a much more simplified shoe design experience. So we looked at those 3 things and we said, all right, we can deliver on those, but we're going to need to go and raise capital, because to bring the lead times down and the unit costs down, we're going to have to build our own shoe factory, because our suppliers just weren't going to be able to scale making shoes one at a time. It's a very different process, and it wasn't something they wanted to do or that anyone else in the world did. And then secondly, we needed to hire more software engineers and user experience people to simplify that shoe design experience. So we went out and raised venture capital. So we ended up raising $35 million over 4 rounds of funding over sort of 5 or 6 years. And that was to scale up the manufacturing and simplify that shoe design experience, bring the lead times down, bring the unit costs down. We then went to where those mass market customers were. So we did partnerships with David Jones in Australia and Nordstrom in the US. So you could design shoes on iPads in their stores and then order them. We're kind of in this. We moved our headquarters from Sydney to Los Angeles because the US had become our biggest market. I spent 4 years living in Los Angeles, doing Shoes of Prey there. So all these kind of good things heading in the right direction, and then ultimately we delivered that value proposition to the mass market customer. So in our last year of operating, we delivered shoes on average in 11 days from when you ordered to when you received your shoes. We charged the same price as you would pay for the same quality shoe in a retail store, and you could shop a range of shoes like you would on any regular website, and then make modifications and tweaks to it. So we simplified the shoe design experience. So we delivered exactly the value proposition that the mass market customer told us she wanted. And our sales grew. We grew from that sort of 2 or 3 million revenue run rate to about 10 or 12 million a year. But we should have been at 100 million if the value proposition was resonating properly. Yeah. And those 20,000 women a day were, a good portion of them, or normal e-commerce conversion rates were applying. We should have been doing 100 million a year in revenue. And we needed to be doing 30 a year to break even, because we now had all these fixed costs of running a shoe factory and software engineers, and we were stuck at 10 or 12 million a year. And so what we realized was we went back and looked at, why is the value proposition not resonating? And we could now watch how consumers behaved when they shopped our shoes online. And what we realized was that mass market consumer, consciously, she thinks she wants to customize. If you ask her, she'll tell you that she wants to. She loves the idea of designing her own shoes. But deep down, subconsciously, she actually doesn't want to. She wants to see what's popular in fashion magazines, what's popular on Instagram, and buy not only that design, but even buy that brand, which is the antithesis of customizing. And your subconscious is more powerful than your conscious mind. So the subconscious was driving a decision-making, which was, I love the idea of designing my own shoes, but I'm not going to do it. And so our value proposition just didn't work with that mass market consumer. We kind of couldn't cross the chasm from our sort of niche creative consumer and wedding consumer into the mass market. And ultimately we ended up closing the business down because we just couldn't scale it.
And I remember when I first heard, I was like, what? No. And I think a lot of people were really cheering for you guys because, you were this Australian startup success story. You guys had, done an incredible job of getting yourselves essentially onto a global platform from a visibility perspective. And then you had to shut it down. Do you remember that decision, or do you remember that day or the lead up to that day where you made that decision? Can you talk me through that?
Yeah, it was December. It was kind of the lead up to would have been December 2017, and we'd just kind of nailed our lead times. We were well under a good 11 days, good 3 days under our 2-week lead time target. We'd done some really good launches on the website that was simplifying the shoe design experience. The website looked amazing. The shopping experience was amazing. Pricing was spot on. And we got to December and looked at our revenue numbers and just realized this is just not ticking up the way that it should be and the way that we're expecting it to. This isn't working. We're running out of cash. And so we kind of made a decision at that point. We tried a few pivots. So we looked at, for example, that wedding segment and thought through, if we focus just on wedding shoes, could that get us to break even? And it just wasn't going to work. We also looked at extended sizes because making shoes one at a time, we can do narrow, wide, short and long shoes. And actually widths is really interesting because 2/3 of people should be wearing a non-standard width. They should be wearing a narrow or a wide shoe. But the market doesn't supply narrow and wide shoes because the inventory would just be too big for a business to carry. But making shoes on demand, we could do that. But we looked at that segment of the market too, and just the education piece to convince people that to tell people they're wearing the wrong size shoe, and then the tech to be able to get the sizing right, and then the subjectivity of, even if you've got the right pair of shoes, it might not feel comfortable to you because you might have a different personal view on it. So that segment, that pivot, we could see wasn't going to work. It was a pretty, that was a pretty shitty time.
And so the day you made, I'm going to assume there was no day where you're like, right, we've got to do it. It is what it is. I'm going to assume it was a lead up, a period. And how long was that period before you had to bite that bullet and make that tough decision? Yeah,
so it's probably it was like taking a Band-Aid off slowly, the way that we did it, which was pretty painful. We thought, okay, when we decided to make that pivot, we cut some of the team. We probably halved the size of the team. So we went from maybe 200 people down to 100 people. And then when we realized those pivots weren't going to work, we cut down further, ended up sort of cutting down to about 30 people to see if we could then sell the business or sell, the factory or some of the assets in the business. That didn't work, so then we ended up shutting down. So it was a good kind of 2 or 3 sort of painful steps over probably 8 months before we finally made the call. We tried to pivot, tried to sell, and then finally made the call to shut down.
Was that a pretty tough period of your life?
Yeah, it was. So we'd had 23 people move from Australia to the US with the company when we moved our headquarters, and most of them were still with us in LA. So, some of our they developed into really close friends. We had a really strong and vibrant culture. When we'd done that move, we'd had 25 people in the Sydney office, and 23 of the 25 moved with us from Sydney to LA. So wow. It was a really strong, tight-knit group and strong culture. That was really painful to then have to let those people go. We'd been very open about everything along the way. People could see the numbers, so it didn't come as a shock to people. But it was still, it was tough to have to let people go and say goodbye. And then, just that side of it. And then personally, as a co-founder, you go into starting a business with this dream of, totally 10 years of your life and this dream of creating something big. And then that doesn't play out the way that you dreamed it would, that's also tough. And then not returning money to $35 million, not returning that money to investors, that was a personally painful thing. Our investors get it. They were really good about it, and some of those have invested into Fable now. But yeah, it's still painful not being able to give them a return on their money or even give them their money back.
When you finally made that decision after 8 months of slowly pulling off the Band-Aid, was there a little bit of relief?
Yeah, I think there was it had been a painful 8 months. When I finally made the decision that was the point for me to leave the business. I had to leave the US because my visa was tied to Shoes of Prey. My wife, Katrine, was pregnant with our second child, so we had to end 7 months pregnant. So we had to actually leave pretty quickly because she wasn't going to be able to fly again soon. So we were kind of forced into making some quick decisions. But we ended up going to, my wife's Danish, so we went to Denmark and spent 6 months in Denmark and had our second child over there. And I just had a good, solid 6 month break, and it was awesome. That was a real, I think I needed it, for my mental health after that experience of the last 8 months with Shoes of Prey. And it was an awesome experience, just being going to a completely different physical environment, being able to think about completely different things, focusing on family. That was good. And
in those 6 months, what were the biggest lessons that you learned in those 6 months? Because I'm going to assume after taking those 6 months off, you're not having to deal with investor relations, team, culture, factories, fuck ups. You've gone from this. I'm going to assume a world that was pretty much back to back for a 10-year period, because it was 10 years of startup land basically. To all of a sudden now everything just fucking stops, and you've now got time, you've now got space, you've now got the ability to not only recalibrate physically, mentally, emotionally, but maybe also even spiritually. I'm going to assume there was some serious reflection during those 6 months as well. What were the biggest things that you came away with after those 6 months down?
I think, it was probably one of the best decisions I've made in my life was to actually take 6 months off and not go jump into something else straight after. Because, I think I would have struggled to do that anyway, just mentally. But it was just hadn't really had a proper holiday in a decade, and it was just so nice to just be able to just switch off. And I think it helped even going to a different part of the world in a new sort of different environment. I was sleeping better, eating better, so much healthier physically, and just had the time and the headspace I didn't force thinking through what I was going to do next. I literally just did what I kind of, spent a lot of time being a dad, and did just a lot of other kind of random things, played computer games with friends in Australia that I hadn't connected with that much in a few years. And then just read a lot of books, read a lot of books, and just kind of wherever my intellectual curiosity went, I just ran with it. Whereas, when you're in startup world, you're trying to read business books and focused on things that are going to help your business. I got the chance to, just
do you remember
sort of do whatever I felt like.
What you read during that period?
Yeah, well, I ended up going down. It was a very different experience actually to the lead up to starting Shoes of Prey. So I ended up just reading about different things in the world that I was passionate about. So, for example, one area that I read a lot about was, I think in today's society, there's a lot of loneliness, a lot of mental health issues. And I think a lot of that comes down to the way that we live. A lot of people live literally in apartments apart from each other. You can live in an apartment and not know the person who is physically 1 meter away from you. Whereas we kind of evolved as humans to live in much more kind of communal structures. And it's particularly visible having young kids. Trying to look after 2 young kids, 2 and a 4-year-old on your own at home in lockdown, it's a real challenge to keep them entertained. But as soon as there's other kids around or other people around, they're kind of engaged. You can just see, naturally, we clearly lived in larger kind of family groups than the way our society is structured today. So I spent a lot of time reading about the history of that, and actually Denmark was a great place to go and explore that, because about 1% of the population in Denmark actually live in different in kind of not communes, but kind of much more communal structures where, there might be an apartment block with a shared kitchen, and everyone in the apartment block comes together and has dinner twice a week in the apartment block.
Wow.
And they might share, the kids might kind of go between apartments, and, just much more social sort of structures. So I spent a lot of time exploring that, which I found fascinating. And then the other area I ended up exploring a lot was I'd gone vegetarian. I've been vegetarian now for about 5 years. For me, a mix of ethical, environmental, and health reasons. And so I ended up reading a lot more about industrial animal agriculture. And I'd been, just as a consumer, I'd been eating all the Beyond Burgers and Impossible Burgers and everything else. And so read a lot more about those businesses and that space. Also just found and cell-based meat, and just found that whole space really interesting. And so then when it was coming towards the end of the 6 months off, those were the two areas that I'd sort of gravitated around, because I could see they were two interesting areas that I felt very personally very passionate about, wanting to either help contribute to, reducing society's loneliness, or help contribute to ending industrial animal agriculture. So we'd kind of decided, we'd come back. We wanted to come back to Australia at sort of around the end of the year. I mean, it was middle of winter in Copenhagen's a pretty miserable time, but so we figured we'd stay for Christmas, and then we flew back sort of between Christmas and New Year's, and we knew we wanted to come and live back in Australia. We were as we were coming towards the end of those 6 months, obviously started to think about what I was going to do next. And after having done all that reading, I was kind of very passionate about wanting to work on one of those two problems, either trying to help society reduce the kind of level of loneliness in society, or helping to contribute to ending industrial animal agriculture. So I started to think about what are the best ways I can contribute to those two things. On the industrial animal agriculture side, I kind of realised I wasn't going to make a very good activist. I'd tried to convince lots of people around me to turn vegetarian. I think I've convinced 2 people, and one of them I caught up the other day, and he's not even vegetarian anymore. So I'm obviously no good at that. And then on the loneliness side, I just couldn't think of a way to fix that. Like, I thought about all sorts of angles, thought about like different business models. Could you become like a property developer who sets up properties that have this sort of structure so that people can come in and live together, but a whole bunch of flaws in that sort of model. But what I ended up coming back to was, in ending industrial animal agriculture, people love the taste and texture of meat. If you can deliver that to them using something other than animals to make it, there's that's a pretty clear good value proposition, and companies like Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods in the US were kind of in the midst of proving that out. And so figured, I'll go into the alternate protein space. And initially, actually, I thought I'll go work in that space. I'll work for somebody else. I didn't want to go do another startup. So I thought I'll try and join Beyond or Impossible, or join an Australian startup in that space. So I came back to Australia, but there were just no jobs, or at least no jobs for a washed up entrepreneur in that category. Everyone was a very new startup in Australia, and the international players weren't hiring in Australia. So I kind of ended up with a decision of, okay, do I go and get a job in a business, or a business category that I'm not necessarily that passionate about, or if I want to do this and help contribute to ending industrial animal agriculture, I'm probably going to have to start a business myself, because there's no jobs, so there's no other option if I want to do that. So ended up deciding to go down the path of starting a meat alternative business.
I'm going to assume in the background here you're already kind of formulating what the products are going to look like, because I'm not going to assume you don't just make a decision, I'm going to go to meat alternatives and go, right, I'm going to make a soy burger, I'm going to make a soy burger, or a chickpea. How did you navigate that space during this period?
Yeah, so no, you're right. Like, all of this was happening in parallel. I was thinking through, okay, if I start an alternate protein business, how should I go about that? And I didn't want to compete head to head with Impossible or Beyond, because they've raised a lot of money and they've got good products. So I was thinking, okay, first thought I had actually was, I'm a pretty healthy eater. Shop at my local farmers markets, do a lot of my own cooking, bake my own sourdough, brew my own kombucha, and I eat a pretty healthy, whole food, minimally processed diet. And the Beyond and Impossible burgers, not that they're unhealthy, they're quite good products, but they don't have an all natural list of ingredients, and they use textured vegetable protein as their base ingredient.
I heard Dave Asprey fucking writing them off yesterday. I was actually quite shocked.
Oh, really?
He said, if I was offered a choice between a piece of industrial meat and a Beyond burger, he goes, I'd go the industrial meat. And I was like, okay, I've clearly missed something along the lines here. like, is there a little bit of a resistance forming towards the beyond and the impossible foods?
Yeah, I mean, I think Dave there's going a little bit far, like particularly in the US, like industrial produced meat that's got the animal's been fed hormones, and there's a lot of
that was a pretty big I don't know
things with that.
If that was I don't know if he's got his own Beyond Meat burger. Yeah, okay. Maybe he's got his own little startup that he's got gearing up in the sidelines. He's trying to gear up for it. Yeah,
he might have shorted their stock, and so he's wanting to play it down. I would disagree with that statement, but they, they aren't like perfectly, you're better off eating vegetables than, health-wise, but they're not trying to do that either. They're trying to mimic meat using plants and not using animals, and they do a really good job of that.
Yeah, they do.
But on the scale of processing from, say, a banana completely unprocessed to, say, an Oreo, a highly processed food, textured vegetable protein, which they use as a base, probably sits somewhere around the middle. So it's not that it's unhealthy, but it's just more processed than a straight up vegetable.
Yep.
So my thought was, and I think there's a great place in the market for those products, and I think they're excellent products, and I eat them when I'm out at a fast food burger joint. But my thought was, when I'm cooking at home, I do eat a really minimally processed whole food based diet. So my thought was, could you produce a meat alternative that uses a whole food based ingredients and doesn't use anything artificial, so it's like completely natural. And you've heard my background. I have no food background whatsoever, so I had no idea if that was possible. So I went out and started talking to lots of people in the food space, and a few chefs put me onto the idea of exploring using mushrooms as a base ingredient. Mushrooms are obviously very healthy, and they've got a lot of those natural meaty umami flavors in them. So I started exploring mushrooms, and then through exploring mushrooms, met my two co-founders. So Jim Fuller grew up in Texas, fine dining chef for 12 years, went and studied chemical engineering and agricultural science, and he majored in mycology, which is mushroom science. And then Jim's worked as a mushroom scientist or a mycologist for the last 10 years. So chef and mushroom scientist in one human being. And then Chris McLaughlin co-founded Australia's largest organic mushroom farm. He was 2018 Australian Organic Farmer of the Year and Young Farmer of the Year. And so, between Chris and Jim, they know everything there is to know about growing mushrooms, the science behind them, and how to cook them.
I bet they're fun
and they
guys.
Actually...
Fun guy.
Oh, I got where you're going. Oh my god!
But I'm going to assume, being in the mycelium space, they're going to have a very alternative perspective on them anyway.
They certainly do. Yeah. And you should stick to business coaching and not comedy. So I met them, met Chris and Jim. They'd been working on some mushroom-based meat alternatives together, and we met up, got on like a house on fire, same goals, same mission that we wanted to work on, and very complementary skill sets. So we ended up co-founding Fable together. And then the first product we've developed is we're replicating. So Jim grew up in Texas, eating all the slow-cooked meats like pulled pork, braised beef brisket. So our first product replicates those slow-cooked meats, and it's 62% shiitake mushroom. So really natural, healthy, whole food base. Shiitake mushrooms have been used in Chinese medicine for thousands of years as a medicinal ingredient. Western science has caught up on that, all the benefits of particularly shiitake mushrooms. And then the rest of our ingredient deck is just a short list of all natural plant-based ingredients. So nothing artificial, clean label. We kind of focus, like, number one is taste and texture. And I know you've got some samples on their way to you, so you'll get to try it. Real focus on taste and texture. Number one, product tastes amazing, like those slow cooked meats do. And then, number two, making it all natural, healthy, really good for you.
And how have you found when it comes to making it? And I know that's been the biggest thing for most people, is how do you make a vegetable taste like a piece of meat? How do you think you've gone? Honestly, I wish I had the chance to try it before we had this conversation, but from your perspective, I'm curious.
Yeah, so it helps to have a mushroom scientist / chef as your head of product development. So mushrooms have got a lot of those natural umami kind of meaty flavors in them to begin with. And I don't know if you remember from like the late 80s, early 90s, there was the mushroom industry did a marketing campaign in Australia around like mushrums and meat
for vegetarians. I remember that.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So they tried. That didn't quite work. They are like, they're already in that direction. And then having a chef and mushroom scientist working on. So we've got some unique IP that we've developed around the cook steps that we use in how we create the product, and those cook steps change some of the protein structures in the mushrooms, which kind of tones down the mushroom flavors and amps up the sort of meaty umami flavors in the product. And then that, coupled with mixing in the right natural plant-based flavors and ingredients, we end up with a product that's got an amazing taste and texture, very much like those slow-cooked meats.
And so what's your distribution model with Fable?
Yeah, so we started out, and actually in the development process, we set ourselves the goal of like, okay, we want to develop this product and we want a like world-renowned chef to like love it and want to use it. So we sort of put together a list of chefs that we wanted to take it to, and number one on our list was Heston Blumenthal. He's a British chef, 3 Michelin star restaurant, The Fat Duck, which was the world's best restaurant in 2005. Jim, when he was working as a chef, had always like looked up to Heston as his idol, because Heston was a very scientific cook. So, and Jim and Chris had actually met Heston a few years earlier, as Heston had been exploring the mushrooms as a food ingredient, and had been introduced to Jim and Chris, and they'd spent probably 4 or 5 days together over the last few years before we co-founded Fable. So we ended up meeting up with Heston while we're developing the product. He tried the product, loved it, and he was our initial launch partner. So he started using the product in his restaurants in the UK.
Wow!
And we did our launch event in December last year at Dinner by Heston in Melbourne. So that kind of kicked off, that sort of launched us. And then our first big customer was Marley Spoon, the meal kit company.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So they started using, and that was December last year too, they started using Fable in their meals, and that partnership's gone really well. So they're now using us in their Dinnerly recipe boxes as well, that they own that meal kit brand, and they're about to launch a ready meal using the product. So they've been a really, really good partner for us. Fantastic food. I subscribe to Marley Spoon, and they're fantastic partners to work with. Then our next sort of phase of our rollout strategy was to roll out get distribution into cafes and restaurants. Obviously, that got a little bit of spanner in the works with COVID, and restaurants closing down. But we've still managed to get in about 100 cafes and restaurants around Australia now, in addition to Heston's restaurants in the UK. And then in April, we launched into retail with Harris Farm in New South Wales, and then into 600 Woolworths stores in June. We're launching. That's the product in the Woolworths stores. You're getting a couple of those.
Fantastic, thank you.
Then we're launching 3 ready meals into Woolworths. So that's kind of what the ready meals look like. They're actually launching next week into the ready meals section. There's a Fable chili con carne, a Fable Rogan Josh, and a Fable stroganoff. And then next month we launch into, end of October, we launch into Coles, into about 800 Coles stores. And then, we've got a big pipeline talking to some of the major kind of quick service restaurant chains in Australia and New Zealand, and also now going to start ramping up in the UK, given that partnership with Heston.
Mate, that's fantastic. How's the sell-through? Because you're currently just in Harris Farms, is that right?
Harris Farm and that base product in Woolworths.
In Woolworths,
so,
right.
Yeah, so that one's in the
and they're moving
meat
well.
alternative section in Woolies. Yeah, they are really well. Yeah. I'd say Marley Spoon's been an amazing customer. So the meal kits have been a really great channel for us. Food service has been fantastic, even with COVID. A lot of restaurants and cafes who've been able to pivot into delivery at home, and now obviously Queensland and New South Wales pretty much open back up to normal. So food service has been great. So we're on the menu in all the Burger Urge stores. They're a sort of 26 store chain up in Queensland. Ribs and Burgers, they're actually all over the country. They do a Fable beef brisket burger. We're in Asahi Brothers. They do a Fable taco. So quite a few of these chains, and then lots of independent restaurants and cafes. So those channels have been awesome for us. And then retail's going great. The initial product, the base product sold out in Woolworths in its first couple of weeks, and then off the back of that,
well done.
Taken on the ready meals. Yeah,
mate,
thanks.
Well done.
No,
and so how long has Fable actually been running now?
So we launched in December 2019.
Okay.
So what's that? We're kind of nine months since launch.
Mate, well done.
Yeah, I mean, no thanks. I mean, we're fortunate that like there's massive tailwinds in the category. Like, a lot of people wanting to reduce their meat consumption. We haven't developed the product for the vegetarian or vegan customer. We're targeting the kind of flexitarian who is a meat eater but wants to reduce their meat consumption. People have watched Game Changers or some documentaries like that, and there's a good 30 or 40% of Australians now have got a good sense that they're eating too much meat and it's not good for them, and so they actively want to reduce their meat consumption, but they love the taste and texture of meat, so they don't want to eat a falafel ball or a hemp seed patty or a tofu burger. They want to eat something meaty. So if you can give them that taste and texture of meat but make it from something other than animals and make it much healthier, then that kind of ticks the box.
And you guys recently just closed your first round of funding, is that right?
Yeah, we actually closed funding just before we launched. So in October last year, we raised some money from a couple of my old Shoes of Prey investors, so Blackbird Ventures and Grok Ventures. Kind of co-led the round, and then some food industry angel investors. So that was kind of a real personal kind of. Felt amazing to have those investors who, I'd lost their money in my last business, but they kind of came back to
Mate, it says a lot about you, doesn't it?
I mean, it then says a lot about them too. Like, I think that they're very supportive of entrepreneurs, and they know that it's a risky game going and launching startups, and it was really exciting to have them involved again.
And at what point do you know whether or not? I guess the question I'd ask at this point: how do you know when Fable is successful?
Yeah. So, I mean, our mission is to help contribute to ending industrial animal agriculture. So, that's setting the bar pretty high. Like, we've got to build a pretty, to have it. The meat industry is a $2 trillion industry globally, and it's 2.5% of global GDP. So it's a massive industry, and we want to switch. We want people to keep eating meat, but we just want them to eat it made from, in our case, fungi and plants rather than animals. So, our mission is to help put a dent in that, together with the other meat alternative companies out in the market. So, so we're a while away from. We're only kind of 9 months into something that will hopefully be Shoes of Prey was 10 years. Hopefully, Fable will be even more than that.
But the commercial side of the business is running quite well. Operationally, revenue is growing. You're hitting your run rates.
Yeah, I mean, it's so much easier doing a business the second time round, like all the mistakes that we made in Shoes of Prey. Right? Oh my God. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, totally. Very similar, actually. That's a good analogy. I mean, like the stuff we've been able to achieve in 9 months, there was 3 or 4 years of, or probably even 5 years of mistakes to get to the same level in Shoes of Prey. And actually, we're probably only a month or two off the revenue that we were at, kind of halfway through 5 years into Shoes of Prey. And it's the business is actually so incredibly similar. It's fashion versus food. Yeah. They're two very different product categories, but it's understanding the customer and the value proposition that the customer wants. All of that's the same. It's how do you manufacture the product? How do you do the logistics of getting the product to the customer? Who do you partner with? With Shoes of Prey, we partnered with David Jones and Nordstrom. In Fable, we're partnering with Coles and Woolworths in retail. We've got the added benefit in this business that there's Marley Spoons and food service channels as well. It's building a brand and speaking to customers authentically about what you're doing. All of those things are the same. It's just refrigerated logistics versus ambient logistics, and just a few little differences like that.
And mushrooms seem to be becoming quite popular. Like there's another business, mushroom business that seems to be getting a lot of traction as well now. Life Cycle. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Life Cycle, but they.
No, I am. I know those guys in Byron too.
Yeah, they are in Byron. Actually, I caught up with Will Scott. I think he mentioned that he might have connected with you at some point.
Yeah, we had a chat kind of earlier this year. Yeah. No, they're great guys, and I love what they're doing. I've got some of their, I think I've got their lion's mane in my fridge.
Yeah.
You take that.
That stuff,
that's great.
I've got to be careful with that stuff. It jacks me up. Being a dad, like obviously now you're doing this second time round. You've now got kids. How have you found your lessons have translated from entrepreneurship, leadership, running a team, building a team, high performance cultures, to being a dad? And how's that translated and transitioned?
Yeah, it's I mean, there's some similarities, I guess. It's also, I think the worst employee, even the worst employee that we've ever had has not broken down in a tantrum in a shopping centre when I'm out with them. So there's a lot of differences too. But I mean, it's obviously being a parent's just been an incredible experience. It's just such a thrill to have young kids around. And I mean, I think actually I was reflecting on that really tough kind of last 2 years or so with Shoes of Prey. Our first child was born in the middle of that.
Yeah, wow.
And I think it actually helped keep me sort of grounded and able to reflect on, okay, Shoes of Prey is not going the way that we want it to, having shit days, like having to lay off 100 people and, just like the not good experiences. But the putting into perspective, like I've got this wonderful son, he's healthy, got an amazing wife, she's healthy. The health of your family is like 100x more important than, a startup not going the way that you want it to. And it's, emotionally, it doesn't feel like that, but being able to step back and think about that logically and kind of reflect on that and realize that, life is about, a startup, it feels like it's everything, but life is about much more than that. And try to convince myself not to get too down in the dumps about those challenges. So I think it was good for that perspective.
Have you ever found yourself in a situation or in circumstances where the situation has affected you quite badly and like you've had to pick yourself up?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean during that 2 years, just the anxiety and the lead up to going to bed at night, knowing that tomorrow I've got to tell 100 people that they're losing their job.
Yeah, wow.
It's incredibly hard for the people that you're letting go and feeling that sort of weight of responsibility, and that our strategic decisions and market research didn't work, and that's what led to this point. It's not these people's fault that they're losing their job. They're high performers. They're doing the job that they are supposed to be doing, and they're doing it really well. It's just that the strategy and the customer research, which is on me as the CEO, and that's why letting them go. That's a pain. That's definitely a painful experience. And not sleeping the night before doing those things, and then afterwards those were the really tough periods.
Well, mate, we've covered a shit ton in the last hour, which is essentially reflected on, I'm not sure how we can fit in 10 years into 1 hour, but we've at least given people an insight. But mate, something I just want to acknowledge, you've clearly been through the ringer. I know you've been through the ringer, not just in business, but the media here in Australia, they love the Aussie battler, but they also love to give people a good tear at the same time. And so, mate, massive kudos to you for hanging in there and jumping back in the ring to have another go. It's clearly paying off for you, which is evident, and your humility is intact, mate, which is probably one of the most important things I think that you can have as an entrepreneur. But I am curious to know, in the last 10 years in your own businesses and 12, 13 years with the experience of being in other people's businesses as well, I guess it's going to be hard to, distill all of that into one piece of advice that you could give to anyone and everyone that they could find some level of practicality. But what's the one piece of advice that you always find yourself giving, or that you always in some cases give yourself in situations or circumstances where, perhaps there is a bit of an uphill battle?
Yeah, I mean, this is cliched, but in my experience, it's so true. Like, if you're going to do something as intense as starting a business, don't do it for the money. Do something that you're passionate about, and then the success and financial success, hopefully that follows. But pick something that you're deeply passionate about. And where that comes from in my own experience is in Shoes of Prey. Like, I wasn't thinking how to, something mission driven or how to do something good for the world. It was women's shoes as a fashion business, and I was in it for I wasn't even in it to wear women's shoes. I was in it for the here's a retail business and a concept that looks like there's going to be product market fit. It was very much a business financial decision. And that I loved so many. I was passionate about so many parts of that business, all the manufacturing, supply chain, building a brand, but I wasn't passionate about the product, and I wasn't passionate about the mission. Whereas with Fable, I approached it from the complete opposite angle, where I wasn't even thinking about starting a business. I was just like, what's the biggest problem in the world I want to work on and I want to help solve? and it just feeds through into, and I'm vegetarian, and these kind of products appeal to me, and it just feeds through into so many things. Like I have a much deeper understanding of the customer. I wake up on a Saturday morning, I never used to wake up on a Saturday morning reading fashion magazines, but I wake up on a Saturday morning now and I want to read about what's going on in the alternative protein industry. And that level of passion and drive, I think startups are still inherently very risky, but I think that gives us a much higher probability of success.
And I think the space you're playing in now also plays to a lot more of a relaxed presentation as well. Like I think last time I saw you, you were in a 3-piece suit with a scarf in your pocket, repping the fashion brand. And
now I'm sitting here with fake meat next to me.
With your baseball cap, your grey t-shirt. Like I fucking love it. But yeah. I'm going to assume in that journey, like and this is no judgment on the previous Michael that I interviewed, but you just seem a lot more relaxed, mate. You seem a lot more calm. You seem a lot more, you were humble back then, but there seems to be a greater sense of real human and humility within you now.
Yeah, no, thanks. Appreciate it. Yeah. And that potentially also maybe comes through the journey of the highs and lows. As much as that bad 2 years with Shoes of Prey was not a pleasant experience, and I hope not to live through it again. Like it was a very humbling experience, and like I think my rate of learning in that period was probably higher than most other periods in my life. Those kind of lows, there's a lot that you can draw from and learn from that experience, and so I hope that helps me to be a better person and better entrepreneur having gone through that, and happy to share those lessons with other people if it's helpful too. You're
a fucking legend, mate. I've got to say, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I've enjoyed getting to know you and more about your story as well. So for people who want to find out more about Fable Meats, we'll put in the links below. It's fablemeat.com. Is that right?
Fable Food Co. And then on Instagram at Fable Food Co. And then, you can find us in your local Woolworths store in the refrigerated meat alternative section next week, in the refrigerated ready meals section, and then launching in Coles at the end of October too.
Well, mate, I wish you guys nothing but every success with what you're doing, and the mission you're on, is one that is required. And I actually like your alternative mission around communities as well. It's interesting. That seems to be a theme coming up with a lot of people these days. So, mate, thank you so much for coming on the show.
No worries. Thanks so much for having me, Kerwin, and great catching up.
Yeah, you too, mate. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Michael Fox.
This episode was brought to you by Nail It and Scale It, the world's leading fast growth program for business.
There you have it, guys. Thanks for tuning in to Unstoppable with me, your host, Kerwin Ray. And please do not forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel where you get to see all of these interviews in the flesh. Share this podcast with your friends and drop me a review on iTunes. I would love to hear what you guys think, and also let you know your comments help make sure that we keep producing killer content just like this. And if you'd like to stay up to date with all of my movements, upcoming podcasts, events, and much more, please jump onto the website kerwinray.com, and also check us out on all social media on the handle at Kerwin Ray. Thanks for joining us.